Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We are Baltimore positive. We are positively into the spring and summer months, and it's not often that I go back to Indianapolis and talk about the Colts. The loss of Jim Irsay last week, and my sit down with him from 2010 that I ran on the air, and we talked to some folks about Jim Irsay. But no one will have better stories than this guy. One-time head coach of the Indianapolis Colts, one-time coach of the Baltimore Colts, and a man who was there with the Mayflowers out in Owings Mills on March 28th, 1984, returns here to talk about the legacy of the Irsay family. We welcome Coach Rick Venturi, a longtime friend of the program. I've had you on at Super Bowls. It's so nice to chase you down. So terrible under these circumstances, but I know you were very, very fond of Jim Irsay, Rick.
Yeah, Nestor, there's no question about it. It's been a tough week, and you can relate, and the people in Baltimore can relate to this. Jim and I go back 43 years. People here lost an owner, a philanthropist, all those things. I lost a dear friend, to be honest with you, over the years. We started there in 1982, basically started together. I was a rookie coach with the Baltimore Colts. Jim was in his early 20s, just there kind of learning the business. And really and truly, we grew up in the organization. I remember the first time that I met him, I was walking down the hall at Owings Mills, and here comes this young guy with the guitar on his back. I mean, anybody that knows Jim knows that he lived in a world somewhere between George Hallis and Keith Richards, to tell you the truth. And we talked music. We were close enough in age. We talked music. We talked football forever. In those early couple of years there with Baltimore, when we really just weren't very good at all, although the second year we showed some promise in 83. I remember, as you do, and paint hours around the move. I can remember it almost minute here. I've talked a lot about it. And of course, Jim was the guy in-house. He didn't trigger the deal. Dad triggered the deal, but he was the guy in-house that pulled us all together that night and, said the deal has been done. We're on our way to Indianapolis. You'll help in the move. The trucks will be here at 11. I mean, I can just remember that like yesterday. And then we moved here, and the early years weren't good. We did make the first playoff appearance for the Indianapolis Colts in 87, had a really good defense, led the league that year. And then my other big experience was in 91. I took over for Ron Meyer in the middle of the season as head coach. And at that point now, Jim had worked his way up to being actually the general manager, the CEO of the operation by 91. And it was that year, I think we went 11 games together. We met every day, Nestor, every single day on football, on game plans, on how to handle his father. I mean, really and truly, it was really a bond that we forged together. And this was one of the worst days of my life. But when I think back on it, when I was let go from the Colts in 93, Jim called me in his office, and I know he didn't want to do it. He gave me a horseshoe. I have it next door to me, right next on the adjacent desk. He gave me a horseshoe that day, and he said, you're a horseshoe forever. And, I thought about that for a long time. Then I went my way, 25 years away. And then Jim was good enough to bring me back in the twilight here of my career and my life, and to give me an opportunity to have a second act in broadcasting. And when he brought me back, I was wondering, I'm pretty unfiltered. I had come from St. Louis and had that reputation of being totally unfiltered. And I asked him, I said, now what's your expectation for me? And he looked at me and he said, hey, Rick, just be Rick. And we established a tradition once I started doing the Colts game. He would come in on the last home preseason game, and he would come in the booth, and he would do the interview with me. And sometimes it would be a quarter, sometimes it would be a whole half of the game. And, sometimes it was controversial, but he was always candid. I think he was comfortable with me, always very candid and unfiltered. And so, again, that 43 years, it encompassed so much. It's a tough loss.
Our guest is Rick Venturi, a one-time coach of the Colts and friend of Jim Irsay and broadcaster with the Colts and the radio network, and now in Indianapolis. You mentioned unfiltered. Jim was kind of unfiltered, wasn't he?
Yeah, he really was. And whether you liked it or not, he was going to say what he meant and what he believed. And at times it was controversial. At times he got into a little bit of trouble with it because he would say exactly what he believed, particularly in those interviews with me. It was absolutely incredible. But again, he was in that sense really, really an honest guy. I think maybe the best thing that his father did in ownership of the Colts was that when Jimmy was that young guy, when he was in his 20s, he forced him to work in every area of the team. In other words, he was in the equipment room handing out towels. He worked in the business end of it, the administrative end of it. Made him learn the advertising of the team. And then he worked in the scouting department for a couple of years. Then he worked with us in coaching for 2 years. So as opposed to most owners in the NFL who are very, very wealthy and buy NFL teams, even though they didn't know the game, Jim actually was a football guy, a terrific football guy. I don't think there's any doubt about it. I don't think he has an equal in the NFL as an owner from the standpoint of actually knowing the X's and O's of the game. I tell them in the NFL, 6. Of the 6, 5 owners always requested the TV copy of the game to watch. Now, why is that, Nestor? Because they wanted to have commentary and they wanted the commentators and analysts to tell them what went on in the game. The only one of the 6 that watched the coach's copy, just like we did, was Jim. So it really, really top football guy.
Rick Venturi is here talking about the life and times of Jim Irsay. You mentioned the iconoclastic part of it, and obviously, Irsay was a 4-letter word in Baltimore for all the things you mentioned in 1984 and taking the team. The fact that Bob wanted his son to have the team, the fact that the Cook family lost it, the Modell family here lost the team, the fact that it stayed in the Irsay control, that Jim clearly had the mental health part of this, clearly had some bad habits, and did some things off the field he shouldn't have done. The way he left the franchise and the fact that his daughters are now going to have it, the fact that the Irsay family stayed in, won championships, had Super Bowls, that it's an amazing accomplishment for that kid with that guitar on his back that you met, that he did hang on to this thing and shine it up at the end of his life.
No, that's exactly right. Shine it up is really a good term. And I've always wondered, and it's problematic because there was so much animus in 1983. It's hard to walk back, but I've often wondered to myself if the Jim Irsay of 2014 would have been the owner in 1983, things could possibly have been different, because in the end, that's right. In the end, when when LA came a calling way back when, and the Colts of Indianapolis were their prime contender, Jim ended up keeping the team here. Now they built him a palace, which is Lucas Oil Stadium, which is a palace, but he kept the team here, and that's kind of a credit to him. That's why I always wonder in '83 had he been the principal involved. Now, when you look at Jim, the success here now. We're struggling a little bit now. We've kind of hit a mediocre part of the franchise. But when you look at what he did when he became the owner, and I think the first thing that people forget, and it surprised me at the time, is Jim put aside his ego because he had been the CEO, the acting, the day-to-day general manager. But when he took over ownership, he put his ego aside and brought in great football people to do the day-to-day stuff. And when you look at it, it's an array of Hall of Famers from Polian to Dungy to Peyton to then Andrew and the Freeneys and Edgerrin James and Harrison and even guys that will be Hall of Famers. I mean, he surrounded himself with a magnificent cast. And actually, if you look at it from, I would have to say 99 to 218, I believe, and I know I'm close if not, they were in the upper 25% winning percentage, 10 division championships. I mean, we got to win a division. We haven't won a division in a long time. Division championships back then were given. I mean, it was a baseline. It wasn't something he really had to strive for. So yeah, he really he and Peyton Manning really put Indianapolis on the map as a football city.
Rick Venturi is our guest. He is in Indianapolis, Indiana. We're talking about Jim Irsay and the legacy and how intertwined Baltimore and the Colts and all of that was. I'll tell you this, he got Peyton Manning there and didn't screw it up. Eli Manning didn't want to go to San Diego, right? And John Elway, part of the Baltimore story in his youth of what really wrecked the Colts and what could have saved the Colts at that time for Baltimore, the fact that Peyton went out there and made it work for a long time, and even in the end, the sort of magnanimous fact that he went to Denver and won a championship and did all of that, Jim handled all of that with a lot of class at that particular point through all of that and winning a championship.
Yeah, there isn't any doubt about it. The Elway thing, put us back. I mean, I was there through that draft and that '83 draft, and that, who's to know what would have happened, if Elway comes on board. But the Manning thing, it wasn't probably as easy a decision. It is in retrospect. But at the time, there was a lot of people that really liked Ryan Leaf. There really was. But in that sense, I think Jim Mora had a little advantage in that we had watched Peyton down in New Orleans. We had watched him as a kid, and one time he came out and threw 7-on-7 for us. And I remember we walked in the locker room. He was a high school senior. We said, that's the best quarterback on the field without question. So, once they made that move, obviously when you draft a Hall of Fame, quarterback, one of the greatest of all times, you got a chance. But they also surrounded him with the right people, the receivers, the tackles, the running backs, the defensive ends when they got a lead. Polian who also is in the Hall of Fame, had a really good formula for building around Peyton.
Well, Polian, Manning, all of that, all is part intertwined with the legacy of Jim Irsay. And last thing for you, Rick, because that guy with the guitar and the sort of iconoclastic, eccentric fellow that Jim Irsay was, that collection he had, just an amazing thing. I got invited up to New York a couple years ago to see him sing with the band and Mike Mills from REM and most of the John Mellencamp band and Kenny Wayne Shepherd, amongst others. Just the mental health part and kicking the stigma and the charity work he did and the $100 bills and, sort of the loud Twitter ownership that he had a decade ago. But his work with charity and his work with that Americana collection he had that's just incredible that will continue on. And I'm sure Carly and the daughters will have that out, and that'll be something that hopefully at some point people in Baltimore get a chance to reach and touch all those guitars and all of that cool stuff he had.
Hopefully, no, that's a one in a million. I don't know what I've heard figures like $1 billion. I mean, he has things that you just can't believe. As you've seen it, it is absolutely unbelievable. He literally loved playing with that band. I mean, you can just see it. He absolutely loved it. He's prepared the girls well. All three girls have had different roles in the organization. Carly has been the football ops person. She was at every practice on the sidelines during training camp, certainly on the sidelines during a game with a headset. So I think you're going to see her very visible as the football op, and because Jim hasn't been really himself. I mean, mentally he's been fine, but he was ravaged the last year and a half physically. The girls have had to do a lot already, so there's a lot of preparation. But Jim is revered here. I mean, he is revered. Moment of silence at the Pacer game. His daughter waved the flag for the 500. Moments of silence, and he's revered here. His philanthropy, as you said, is well known. It's very well known. His giving is well known. What isn't well known is how much he's done for people individually, for groups in this city, just giving of money and time for these people. He's done so much, and in that respect, he's revered. He's also revered by ex-players. I mean, when they talk about him, and they talk about him, it is absolutely touching. It is really amazing. So, it's like I said, for me, it's very difficult because I just lost a hell of a friend that I grew up with in pro football, and it's just very difficult. Ironically, we'll be there in August for that first preseason game. We'll be in Baltimore, so.
Well, maybe I'll
I
bring
look
you
forward to
back
that.
on, and we'll fight with our computers again, and I'll have you tell me some Mayflower moving van stories because I know you have managed to make some of those stories rather humorous 40 years later, right?
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. We could talk all afternoon on the move itself, and some experiences that I had, not so much with Jim, but with his dad. I mean, when I was the head coach, we won't get into them now because I could go on and
Well, he
on. But
fired
yeah,
everybody in the
I've
morning and
got
then
some good
hired him back at
stories when you're ready
lunchtime,
for
right?
it.
I mean that was part of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
lore, right?
yeah. Oh yeah. He was waiting for me one time at the half, just ready to blister me. I mean, really. And Jim had always told me, whenever my dad gets in your face, the one thing you can't do, you can't back down. Because if he thinks you're back down, he's got you. And so I stood up. It was uncharacteristic, but I stood up that day, and we walked out of there together. So yeah, it's really been interesting, and to have been there in the early days, and then to come back, like I say, in the twilight. Now I missed a lot of the good times in there, but it's been fun.
Rick Venturi is here. It's always fun chatting with Rick Venturi, longtime NFL coach in New Orleans, Indianapolis, a bunch of places. But most importantly, he was with the Mayflowers on March 28th, 1984, when the Baltimore Colts became the Indianapolis Colts. That's all good. We got 2 championships here. Look at you holding your stickers up. You're having a good time with your
I
Baltimore
got the
Colts thing.
Baltimore sticker.
All right,
I
listen,
always keep that right on my desk.
next
Right
time we
here.
get together, we'll talk about bad preseason football. We'll tell some Frank Kush stories. We'll talk more about Jim. We'll talk some Bob Irsay. My thanks to Rick Venturi for joining us out in Indianapolis, where he remains the radio voice of the Indianapolis Colts. I'm Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.